As a beginner to using watercolours in my nature journal, I wanted to try dry brushing and glazing techniques for the first time, but there was one problem: I didn't like the end results. Hi, I'm Diane, and I like to go on walks in the countryside and record what I see in my nature journal. And the subject for today is this daffodil. I often want to abandon painting and sketching projects when I find them challenging, and I need to find ways of avoiding doing this. I'm going to show how I created this page in my journal, but I also want to talk about my thought processes, both negative and positive, and how I stopped myself from leaving a painting unfinished. What I'm going to share with you has completely changed my approach to choosing colours. I'm a beginner to watercolour, and one of the biggest challenges for me is choosing which colours to use. Sometimes that's meant I haven't even started the painting because I just don't know what to do. In the past, I've tried to find out what colours other artists have used, and then I've found that I don't have any of those colours, and it would be very expensive to buy them all. So one of the things I've learned is it's important to note that colours can be swapped for what you have, and you may have something very similar. So what I did for this painting is to find all my yellows and swatch them on the left-hand side of where I was going to do my painting. I just wanted to see how they looked on the paper. And this is important to do in any sketchbook because paper can change how the colours look. When I've swatched all the colours that I thought I'd use, for this painting I'm going to try the glazing technique, and that involves using lots of layers. So the idea is you put down one layer of watercolour, let it dry completely, and then add another layer on top. But I wasn't sure how this would work with the yellows that I've got. So when I'd swatched the colours, I waited for them to dry and swatched another layer over the top. I also tried the wet on wet technique shown here. I mixed a green using the different yellows with phthalo blue. And I also mixed a colour that was a darker neutral. I labelled all these colours afterwards so I could remember what I'd done. I found that some of the yellows did darken quite a lot and others didn't. And in the end I decided I preferred the lemon yellow because it was very vibrant and almost translucent. And then the other yellows I thought I could use on top to add detail. When everything had dried, I continued my experiment by glazing different colours over the top of colours that had already dried, and I got some interesting results. I wanted to see if by using the glazing method, if I could create colours such as green by placing one colour on top of another without mixing them, or if I needed to mix them first. The darker colours underneath seemed to dominate the colour on top, so I came to the conclusion that I would need a combination of mixing colours as well as glazing them. I labelled all my swatches at the end, but there was one of the yellows I couldn't remember what it was, so it's maybe a good idea to label it as you go along. I also tried lifting the paint using a wet brush just to see how staining they were. And this is quite useful to know if you want to remove some of the colour from the page later on, or if you want them to remain stable as you glaze over the top. As you can see, some of the colours lifted and others didn't. And this is how I chose my colours. I'm going to explain my colour choice after I've completed the drawing stage. I must say though that I did regret one of the choices that I made when I did the actual painting, but I think I can only learn from doing this, record what I did, and then maybe make a different choice next time. I think the important thing for me is not to abandon the painting completely. One of the things I tend to do when I'm doing these paintings in my sketchbook is to rush the drawing stage. So I thought I'd use this very cheap sketching paper to sketch out the flower first and then transfer it into the sketchbook. I referred to the photo I'd taken and chose the daffodil on the right-hand side as my subject. I like to use guidelines, so I drew one going through the centre of the plant and one to indicate the direction of the stem. What I found helped with this plant is to draw these circles, which I think are called ellipses, a smaller one and a larger one for the corona in the middle of the plant, and then joined the two circles to give it this cone shape. I like to do some research into the anatomy of the plant because I think that helps me to draw it, and the cone in the middle is called a corona, and what I originally thought were petals around it are actually called tepals or tepals, and there are 6 of these that go around the central point. So I drew another ellipsis and made sure that the 6 tepals fitted within it, and then I used my guidelines to add the stem and then some leaves coming off of it. The leaves grow right at the bottom of the stem. When I'd finished with that, I went around the whole thing with a black fine liner pen. And to transfer it, I'm using this tracing down paper. You need to make sure you've got the right side facing down. Put your drawing over the top and trace over the lines. And then when you lift it off, there's a very faint outline. I could have just used this, but I decided to go over it with a pencil, and I used this 2H pencil, which is very faint. And I also referred to my reference photo again to make sure that I was happy with the outline. And this saved me a lot of time later on trying to change the painting when I wasn't happy with it. I think it's a good idea to make sure you're happy with the drawing before you start the painting. I also have to say that I tried to do this about 3 times before I was happy with it, but it didn't matter because I was just roughly sketching it and trying out different shapes. And I think because I did that I ended up with a result I was fairly happy with. And at this stage I was happy to continue. I used this synthetic brush, which is a size 12, and I like that it goes to a point. I added on the first layer of watercolour, which was lemon yellow, or in my paint supplies it's called Winsor yellow, but I think they're the same thing. I added a layer over the whole thing, leaving some areas of white to show through. I still felt happy with the painting at this point, and all seemed to be going well, but my choice of colour for the final layers didn't quite work out. I felt like I couldn't go back and just had to carry on. This is one of the biggest mistakes I think I make. Sometimes I focus too much on technique. Yes, this is good to know, but sometimes it stops me from finishing the painting because I think it's not good enough. I managed to finish this painting by shifting my focus onto what I wanted to find out or record in my sketchbook. Here I'm adding the cadmium-free yellow around the edges. And as the paint's still wet, I was hoping it would blend into the lemon yellow. It did a bit, but not as much as I thought it would. In the end, I decided to leave it to dry so that I could add another layer on top. I added another layer of lemon yellow, and I also added green to the stem and leaves. The green was a mixture of phthalo blue green shade and cadmium-free yellow. After I'd left it all to dry, it was time for the final layer using a technique called dry brushing. And dry brushing just means that you use a very fine brush and you add very little paint to it. So you'll dip your paint in the watercolour, and I wiped it on some tissue. The paintbrush you choose shouldn't hold a lot of water, and you can just take off a bit of the paint on a tissue before you apply it to the page. And I found this very difficult, but I thought I'd give it a go. So here you can see I'm adding the detail around the edge, and I decided to use a colour called Azo Yellow. And at this part of the painting I still liked what I'd done, but I decided that the tonal values weren't dark enough, and I mixed a deeper tone which I thought made all the colours look very muddy. I think this comes with experience of painting botanical flowers with watercolour. I think the professional illustrators will know which colours to use to keep it vibrant. My original intention was to use the Winsor Violet because it's a complementary colour to the yellow, and I thought I could use that to add in the darker tones. I think the idea of complementary colours is that it's a colour on the opposite side of the colour wheel, and therefore if you add purple to yellow it will create a darker tone that you could use for the darker values in the painting. But I don't know why, but I decided to do something else instead. I'd read in a book that if you mixed a yellow, a blue and a red together, it would make what's called as a harmonic shadow. So I thought I'd try that. So I mixed up Winsor Lemon, phthalo blue and cadmium-free red. And it made this, what I thought at the time was a really nice dark brown tone. I started to add it as a darker tonal value, but as soon as I did it I regretted it because I felt it made all the yellows look muddy. It was kind of weird really because I didn't think it would do that, but because I'd already added it I had to carry on and I don't think the colours are as vibrant looking as they were, but I carried on and added it to the whole of the daffodil, and I just thought I'd make a note not to do this again. I added some more darker tones to the leaves and then I left it to dry. I did enjoy this stage, but as I continued I wasn't happy with how it was looking. And at this stage I did think I may as well just abandon the whole thing. But then I had an idea. I decided to completely change the look of this page and how I originally thought it would turn out. And why was this, you may ask? Well, looking at the daffodil as it turned out, it reminded me of the types of illustrations you would get a long time ago. I think it was the brown that did it. And instead of being disappointed with the painting, why not just change the whole style of the page? I did everything in pencil first, including drawing some boxes where I thought I could add the text, and also places where I thought I could add a black and white drawing. The idea was to make it look like an old world version of a botanical page. I decided to add some text around the daffodil that was in more of a calligraphy style, which was a bit of a challenge because I don't normally write like this. I found some examples on Pinterest, such as the one you can see in the background. I didn't copy them exactly, but I used a similar layout. So I had the daffodil in the middle of the page. I used a pencil to mark out where I was going to have the text and where I was going to add in some more drawings. In other words, the whole page started to look like an old nature notebook. And because there was a lot of text and some other drawings, it took away the focus from the central subject, which is the daffodil. And I think because of that, I started to like it a bit more. I quite liked the idea of the whole page being covered with no white spaces showing. I really like that look, as if all the information I could possibly add is on there. I drew a diagram of the anatomy of the daffodil. I like the idea of learning something about the plant when I draw it. I added the title of the page underneath the daffodil. And I think I messed it up a bit, but it still looks okay. I think I need to get away from the idea of being too neat. I like the idea of pretending to be a botanist that's discovered this flower for the first time. And I think doing all of this was much more enjoyable rather than worrying about if I'd made a good job of the watercolour or not. I think for me it all needs to be a bit more playful and not too serious. I also like to record the colours that I've used, so I swatched all the final colours at the bottom of the page. I found an old ink pen that I'd not used for ages, and it was good to use it again and make use of something that I'd not used for a long time. I covered up the painting with a piece of paper just in case I splashed any ink. It's a nice feeling to complete a page and clear everything up, ready for the next challenge.